Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kelly Snyder. I'm a producer at Bungie and one of the co-founding members of the Bungie Diversity Committee and former lead of Xbox Women in Gaming. And we're here today to talk to you about how we can foster diversity in games. So kind of moving beyond the 101 of what is diversity and moving into kind of the action steps of what can we actually do as studios to help tangibly foster an inclusive and a diverse environment. Which isn't to say that any of us here are perfect. Nobody's got it all figured out. I mean, even this panel, we could be a little more diverse. But we wanted to get together and talk to you guys about what we've learned, our experiences, and so that we can all share and learn and get better together. So we'll do some quick panel introductions.
Sure. Is that on? Yeah, okay. I'm Elaine Chase. I'm the Vice President of Global Brand Strategy and Marketing for Wizards of the Coast. I lead the Magic the Gathering business there. And in addition to my day job, I'm also President of the Board of Child's Play, the charity for children's hospitals and domestic shelters.
I'm Mary Olson. I'm the Executive Producer of the Internal Game Development Team at 343. We make Halo.
I'm Leah Hoyer. I am the Vice President of Creative at Telltale Games.
Hi, I'm JC Lau. Hi, people in the corner. I am a test engineer at Bungie and also a co-founding member of the Bungie Diversity Committee. And before I worked in games, I was a professor in the philosophy of race and gender at Virginia Tech.
Awesome. So in terms of format, each of our panelists is going to come up and give a short talk talking about what they've done at their studio. And then we're going to move into, I've got some questions for them, and we're going to discuss them as a group. And then after the panel's over, we'll be available for if you guys want to come up and ask us questions. So, and Elaine is going to come up and kick it off.
Thank you. So as I just said, I'm Elaine, and I work at Wizards of the Coast, and I make Magic the Gathering. I've had the honor of working at Wizards for 19 years. We're primarily known in the industry as the titans of tabletop gaming, but a few years ago, we started investing heavily into building up our digital gaming capabilities so we can bring our brands Magic the Gathering and Dungeons & Dragons to life in the way they really deserved. And as we started hiring, we realized that we didn't really have a good talent pipeline for the new set of skills that we needed to bring into our building or for diversity. Because I hope that you all realize that having a diverse set of people brings in greater skill set. So we took a hard look at what that was, and we realized that over the 25 plus years we had been a company, we had been relying really heavily on the passion of our fan base to fill our applicant pool, and that just really wasn't going to get us where we needed to be. And so we looked at how we were presenting ourselves and what we were saying, and we realized that on top of that, our culture had kind of drifted, and we didn't really know what we stood for anymore. And if we couldn't clearly articulate what we stood for and why it was awesome to come work at Wizards, then how could we possibly convince other people to do that? So we started a internal effort to define our mission and values. And that alone, that whole process is worth its own GDC talk, which maybe I'll give one day. Joe's actually going to talk about Bungie's mission and vision, mission and values process in a little bit. So I'll cut to the chase and just say that the number one value, as stated by our employees ourselves, was diversity and inclusion. And so we took a really hard look and said, okay, well, how are we living that? And how can we be better? And what can we do to make sure that we're doing that to the very best that we can? And so the things I'm going to talk to you today are focusing on the applicant journey. So you've probably been in a bunch of talks today already talking about the player journey and the importance of a funnel, right, and getting people through the door and making sure they stick. And so that's the kind of things that we're going to focus on for my part of the talk. So some things we did. We revamped our career website to showcase our mission and our values, to feature the diversity of our employee base, to highlight our amazing family-friendly benefits and charitable activity, just try to be overall more inspirational for people trying to join the company. We're doing more targeted recruiting and employment branding at local venues, like the Grace Hopper event and Geek Girl Con in Seattle, as well as hosting Tech Lady events at our office. We're doing industry talks like this one, and we're generally just being louder and prouder about waving our flag as an employer of choice who's actively looking for diverse candidates. So once we have people's attention, the next step is to craft a really good job description. So the critical thing to think of here is that your job description is the first conversation that you're having with the person that you're eventually going to hire, okay? So when you think of it that way, think about showing off to them what the team they're going to join is like, what the culture is like, so they can really envision themselves in that environment. Emphasize how they can contribute to success, right? The success of the company, not just at the individual level. Try to keep any requirements list to a minimum. So studies show that men will apply to a job description where they meet about 60% of the requirements on a requirement list. Women tend to think requirements are requirements and will only apply if they meet 100% of that list. So instead of requirements, think more of things like skills that will help success, or things that are a plus, or things like that. Word it differently than just requirements. Avoid loaded words. Gendered is really obvious, but also avoid words like rock star and ninja and things that can evoke kind of a bro-centric mentality. I guess if you work for Rockstar Games, you can use Rockstar, but that might be the exception. Clearly state a commitment to diversity and actively invite diverse applicants to apply. And then here's actually the most important point. Have your job description and show it off to the people in your company, to a diverse group of people, and have them comment on it and see what they say. You'll be really surprised to hear what they might say in terms of things that seem innocuous to you, but to somebody reading it from the outside, just kind of turns them off or makes them question if they'd be a good fit or not. So you take all that, and let's see what that looks like. So up on the screen is a portion of a revamped job description for a design manager in our Magic R&D team. So I'm not going to read this to you because it's really long, but you can capture it, and of course it'll be up on the vault later. So let's say you've got this great job description. Now what do you do with it? So you've got to go out beyond your normal channels, go out beyond your website, go out beyond LinkedIn, and go to places where diverse pools of candidates will be. Go to places like Women in Gaming and Blacks in Technology. Go to diversity groups at your local colleges. The point is, if you go where they're gathering, they're going to know that you have a commitment to looking for them, and they're going to be more eager to apply and see themselves in your company. So then, make sure you're actually getting them in through to your interview stage, right? Like, you don't want to just leave it out there and leave it to chance. You actually want to talk to some of these people. So I have my own kind of personal management rule that I require my hiring managers to at least talk to a woman. Now, you don't need to hire for diversity. You don't. That's not the point, right? And the point here is not to say you need to have diversity hire slots or anything like that. The point is if you talk to people, you'll find people with skill sets that maybe you never would have found otherwise, right? So thinking about that applicant journey again, thinking about that funnel, you want to get as many people into that funnel as you can, because then eventually you'll get them more out down the other side, okay? And then when you actually have people in, live it in your interview. Have a diverse group of people interviewing on your panels and that they're talking to. And you want that for two reasons. One is you want to make sure you've got a broad amount of feedback from your own employees to give you a broader sense of what that candidate is capable of. And the second reason is because you've got a greater chance of that candidate seeing someone like them thriving in your company, right? If you see someone like you thriving, you're more likely to think that, oh, hey, maybe this is a place that I can be successful too. So shout out here, by the way, to Ken Troop on our R&D team. He's a designer there who crafted this job description. He's a great ally, and that leads me to my last point, which is allies and the importance of allies in your company. We've got our head of Magic R&D design group is Mark Rosewater, and just last week he answered this question on Tumblr that I'm going to pop up in a minute. And this one I am going to read out loud to you. I get that you're trying to mock diversity and inclusion, but I think it comes from an ignorance of what it means to feel excluded. When you've lived your life in the majority, it's easy to take it for granted when you see yourself represented in the products and entertainment that you use. But every time we branch out, and I'm not exaggerating, I mean every time, and represent a new group of people, I get heartfelt messages from them about how much it means to them to see themselves in the game. The reason Wonder Woman and Black Panther have been such cultural touchstones is because they're allowing new groups of people to experience something they've never experienced before. I get that it's easy to mock that when it's something so basic to your experience that you don't even recognize that it's a thing you'd miss if you didn't have it. But I beg for you to try to see life through other people's perspectives, just as I always talk about how good designers see their game through different players' perspectives. Try to take actions that build up the world and make it a better place for everyone than to tear it down for others to make your world better in comparison. So thank you to Ken and to Mark and to all the great allies I have at Wizards and here in this room and everywhere else in the industry, because this helps. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Mary Olson. As I mentioned, I'm the executive producer for the internal development team at 343 Industries, and we create the Halo franchise games. So I'm happy to be here today. Diversity in our beloved industry is a loaded and complex and extremely important topic. I will attempt to draw lessons that relate to fostering diversity of thought, gender, background, culture, perspective, abilities, and skill. But I want to be upfront with that I'm coming to you as a cisgendered female and will be sharing some of my personal experiences to illustrate lessons we're learning. We need to be fostering diversity at all levels. This conference is a good example. If anyone, this conference is a good example of the industry side. So if anyone has been to GDC 10 years ago versus today, it's a completely different conference. And with a lot more focus on inclusivity, and it shows. Then as studios and organizations, we also need to be looking at diversity, and some of my colleagues on this panel are going to go more deeply into that. And then there's what we can do as individuals, and that individual learning and influence is the piece that I'm going to focus on today. Before I do that, here are a few of the tactical efforts we do across 343, Xbox, and Microsoft. Microsoft's mission statement is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. So that's our foundation. Xbox has diversity-focused initiatives that provide community advocacy and a strong presence across the company and in the industry, like Women in Gaming and other organizations like that. Gaming for Everyone focuses on diversity in our fans. We have inclusivity-focused core values. And at 343, we have a diverse senior leadership team. And that has made a tangible difference in our ability to attract and retain diverse employees. We've changed our approach to hiring and recruiting and the language we use in job descriptions as well. Some of the stuff that Elaine was mentioning and some ideas from her that I plan to steal. And Microsoft has a number of valuable trainings required for managers, for example, around unconscious bias and dialoguing across differences, which I've personally found really valuable. Beyond initiatives and practices, I believe that fostering diversity lies in the attitudes and actions of individuals as well as teams and companies. Each of us has a responsibility to challenge our assumptions daily and grow in our understanding of the issues we face when it comes to making needed change. Here are a few anecdotes from myself and drawing from other people on our team to illustrate the need for ongoing growth and change, because we have a long way to go. So I've spent most of my 23-year career in audio production and leadership for games, thinking it was enough to just be a woman and show up. I'm really results focused, and I've always been heads down and really immersed in the game that I'm making at the time. Outside of that, my time goes to my family. I have 2 AFAB kids. That's assigned female at birth. They taught me that. They teach me a lot every day. Beyond just staying heads down and focused on the job, this is hard to admit. I have spent a lot of my career being part of the problem and fueling the problem. What I mean by that, I've sometimes been really hard on women that I've encountered along the way. And I really have had this expectation of all of them to be really high-performing superstars, representing womankind as like its highest caliber at all times. And I've since realized that a really big part of this problem is that there's only room for high performers for any minority group in this industry. And one of the signs of progress that I hope we see, and that we do start to see, is when there is room for solid average performers and the whole spectrum, as there is with the kind of majority. So I think that'll be good progress. Microsoft hosted a dialogue across differences training, and we were asked how inclusive we thought our respective teams would be to someone coming out as trans or queer in our environment, on a scale of 1 to 5. And the first thing that popped in my head was, well, 5 if they're high performing. And so that really that was enlightening for me, and it really uncovered this bias that I've been carrying around. And it's not until more recent years, honestly, from trainings like that, from long conversations with colleagues, keeping the conversation going, long conversations with my now young adult kids who are trying to work out their place in the world as well and wrestle through some of this. And more than anything, the process of building and growing and fostering a team and strengthening a team, that I've really started to challenge my biases and assumptions in a meaningful way and have transformed my personal thinking about what it means to really be inclusive. I still put the game first. That's still a value that I have. The difference is that I now realize that building a diverse team and having a diverse team is putting the game first. That's what we need to make the best game that we can make. And this is a worthwhile journey. A colleague of mine who is in a leadership position at our studio had feedback from a former manager that she's aggressive. She's a self-aware person, and it didn't fit feedback she'd gotten in the past. So she dug in further with him, wanting to understand if the feedback was his opinion or it had come from other people on the team. He admitted that it was just his perception. So she took the time to talk to him about how common this perception is of women in leadership positions, and she sent him some articles to help give him more awareness of this specific type of bias. This was a situation where he lacked awareness, and once brought to his attention, he was extremely receptive and eagerly read the information she sent and asked her for more. That was the start of a conversation and a real change in their relationship. So she was willing to educate and teach the behaviors she wanted to see, and he was willing to learn, and it transformed his management style. I had a person on my team raise concerns and give some critical feedback about a peer, and he came back to me later with really different feedback. He hadn't realized that this person had a disability, which explained the issues he was having. And most importantly, once he was aware and he changed how he was interacting, his concerns were alleviated and his feedback actually took a total about-face. And he and other people on the team have now called out how her disability is a strength on our team, not a weakness. She brings a unique perspective, some highly developed skills as a result, and that no one else on our team has, and she's a strong advocate. We have to be, so I want to call out too that it was really impressive that he came back and actually admitted that and took the time to change his feedback, but also say, hey, look, like I just wasn't aware. I think it's so important. We have to be willing to stumble and learn as we go. This is not a perfect journey because we're all kind of figuring it out and there's a lot to learn. We recently had someone on our team leave, and this wasn't the reason she left, but in her exit interview, she noted the locker room talk that she experienced day to day among the people around her. And it really, and she didn't want to stop it. She didn't want to be the fun killer. So instead, she just remained uncomfortable and just dealt with it. It made us realize that we need to proactively create safe opportunities to discuss unique challenges of different groups of people like this. And we need to train and educate managers and people on the teams in such a way that we're creating advocates on our team. Sometimes it's just helpful to have someone else be speaking up for you. And here's the final story that I'll tell. I was wrestling through what to share for this presentation with a few of the leads on my team, sharing with them that I find it really hard because it's so important for us to keep this conversation going, but there's also a sense like you're never doing enough. The next morning, one of them shared this story with me. On a Friday night, he and his daughter were talking about their day as he tucked her in. He told her that he had lunch with his boss, and she asked, what's his name? And he said, my boss's name is Mary, and she's a woman. This apparently blew her mind, and she lit up and started asking a bunch of questions about how I got into this position, and how at several points throughout the weekend, she let him know that she wanted to be his boss one day like Mary. I think she's probably already the boss. He was hard on himself because her worldview up to this point hadn't shown her that she could do something else like that. And that was a worldview he felt responsible for. I'll also mention that she's 3, so good news, there's still time for her to develop a broader worldview. He thanked me for helping teach his daughter that she can be anything she wants to be, and they're now having very different conversations. It's also a reminder that showing up sometimes really it's not enough, but it can help make a big difference. So if you feel like an outsider, don't stay in isolation. Find mentors, others who understand, advocates, and support. And if you love making games, stick around and do what you can do to affect change and develop our industry. To everyone, no matter what your background, make room. You can be part of this ongoing conversation and part of change in your individual day-to-day life. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leah, and like I said before, I'm at Telltale. I am here in part to share all of this, and also I'm going to tell you a couple stories because I work at Telltale. I think every person in this room is here because you maybe are encountering a problem, you've seen issues, there are certain things that you're looking to change and solve while you're working in this industry. Maybe you're hiring people. And it's, of course, very important for you to figure out exactly, specifically, what is that problem that you might be trying to solve. It might be some existing culture, it might be problems of recruiting. But once you identify that, the thing that I really want to encourage everyone in this room to be thinking about is truly the power of why. Like, why is that thing something that you are looking to change, something that you are looking to solve? You have to be really honest about the various factors that might go into that. And to illustrate this, what I actually want to say is I'm going to tell you a pretty great story that I actually think can be a good illustration of sort of the power of why. Before I came to Telltale, I actually worked at a company called ArenaNet, known for their Guild Wars franchise. And about 6 months into my tenure there, the entire company got an email from our HR department that said a colleague of ours, who we used to know as a man, wanted to be referred to by the pronouns of she, her, was going to be using a different name. She was going to be fine if you asked her any questions. She knew we were going to slip up and maybe make mistakes, but also if there was anything that people didn't maybe feel comfortable asking her, talking to her about, the HR department was going to be there and be open to discussion. I was so kind of taken by the fact that this person who I was actually good friends with, hadn't talked to me even directly, but had felt like, you know what, I know this is going to be a problem. I want to rip the Band-Aid off, honestly, just once so I don't have to go around to 320 people, and went to the HR department looking for guidance and help, and they really stepped up and said, look, if it would be easier, we will send something out, and we can make that announcement and know that this is someplace that not only are you saying it, but that we are saying that this is absolutely something that shouldn't be an issue for the company. It should be something that everyone should be very accepting of. I never once, in the entire time that I was there, heard a negative comment, any kind of like rude question, anything along the way, because the other thing about the culture of this company was that I knew it was never going to be tolerated. And I think the other people working there also knew that. This person, it was legitimately not even an issue for the entire company because this person was still our friend and still our colleague. The thing that I was most kind of taken with was also over the next 6 months, 2 other people had the same transition and went through the same process with very much the same results. And I will say, first off, huge props to these 3 women for going through what was obviously going to be a difficult personal transition and being honest with who they really were. But I also know from having talked to them that it was easier for that second and third person, like somewhat easier to know that they were going to go through this process, make this announcement, because they were going to be accepted, at least at their workplace. There was that like strength there that I think was something that was just built into the culture of the company. And so I look at that as when I think of the why was that possible, as I look at what ArenaNet sort of developed a culture over time. First off, they make Guild Wars, and in Guild Wars 2, this right here is 5 of the core cast members of the story of Guild Wars. 2 of them are a same-sex couple. One of them is a young girl with physical limitations. And what I love about the stories that are in Guild Wars is that's never what the story's about. You know, the story is absolutely about dealing with the struggles of video game stuff, you know? I mean, there's big villains, and there's big problems, and there's dragons, and there's world things to solve. And we just have great representation in the characters and in the story of that game. And that is, I feel, really interesting because I think what happens at ArenaNet is, first off, any company starts off saying things like, we value diversity. We think inclusivity is important. Well, actually, not every company does. Every company should, and make sure at the baseline, that's what you're doing in your workplace. Whether you're an individual person, whether you're a person who's hiring and managing people, whether you run a company, it is important to say it. And people talk about how talk is cheap. Talk is a good start, right? From there, though, they also were very much backing it up with their actions. The actions that clearly, as we all know, speak louder than words. And what I think is great about the game company that is making entertainment, they made stuff that backed up their idea of inclusivity and diversity. And we have an ability in this industry to do all of that, to change the dialogue, not just in our companies, but in society. And I think that's amazing. And here, it's actually tough for us to even look back at the history of ArenaNet and say, well, where did it start? There's kind of a chicken and egg thing here. The truth is, it doesn't matter where you start. You can start by making something, you can start by saying something, you can start by putting your actions out there. But as you start to go through that cycle and build on it, all of a sudden you turn that like question of, why is this a problem, to like, why is that company doing such great stuff? Why is it feeling that like there's, because they say, they act, and they make. I also now want to talk about a slightly different issue when I moved over to Telltale. I showed up as the head of the creative department, which is writing, design, creative directors, voiceover, and we had a really bizarrely huge, from my perspective, number of open spaces for narrative designers. And I was having discussions with people, and they were saying things like, well, it's such a strange thing that we do here at Telltale. We'll go down to Hollywood, and those people don't understand interactive, or we'll go to game studios, and most game studios just don't care about story the way we do. So getting a person who really is a good writer or narrative designer is like almost impossible. It's like finding a unicorn. And I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting conundrum, and I do understand what they're talking about, because hey, we are looking for folks that are definitely different than what's going on in the industry. And to be honest, it also, we're looking, as we're filling these things, with diverse voices. That's super important because, you know, we tell stories, and stories are universal, and stories need to represent all of us, right? So what the suggestion I had is like, hey, could we see about making unicorns? And I kind of got some blank stares. And the whole point was, to me, if you are just looking to people in, say, the video games industry who are already working in the video games industry, you're never going to make the video games industry more diverse. You might borrow or steal some diversity from one company, but now they have the same problem. Or you might get certain talent out there, regardless of however they identify, you're going to be pulling it from different places, and we're not going to change it up. What if we went out to people and gave them a mechanism that if they just understood at their core what it is that we do, could we be their first job and really find something that was awesome? So what we actually did is something we called internally our Unicorn Summit. And it is our creative workshop that we actually did this time last year. We, towards the end of 2016, put out an open call. And what we asked was people submit a statement about why they would like to work at Telltale and why they would like to be part of this creative workshop that we put on. And they had to make a twine. And twine is a quick, easy to understand, you can all pick it up way to do a simple interactive story around a prompt. They sent those two things in, and we just said, look, we don't really even care about your resume. We don't want to know any of that. We took all the names off of it, looked at those two things, and we invited 22 people to come be part of our day-long creative workshop. the diversity that we got in this thing was actually really astounding. It was about 40% women. We had age ranges from 19 to 57, which also, absolutely, age in the games industry is also something we really need to be looking at. You know, it's not okay to say that people sort of age out of being able to make great content, or that, you know, you have to get a certain amount of experience before you can make great content. And we had a wide variety of racial diversity. From this, at the end of the day, what we did after getting this is ask people to redo the thing that they submitted to us. And we looked at that. We got a chance to actually see their soft skills, how they worked, how they were part of it, how much they took feedback, all those things. And we actually made 2 offers. Both of them happened to be women, but it was because they came, they showed up, it was their first jobs in the games industry, and they are amazing at what they do. That we are so happy to have them on our team. But I don't think we would have filled out what we needed to do at the time with the right kind of candidates nearly as quickly if we hadn't actually opened up the pool. And I know that was brought up earlier. You've got to think about how do you go out to different groups of people. So really, in summary though, with all of this, I would like to encourage you to think about, say, act, make, all around your why. And I think if we're all doing that, like, why is it the way it is? How can we do these things to make it better? We are going to see greater diversity in our industry in the very near future. Thank you.
Hi. In the interest of accessibility, I want to give a shout out to the AV guys for giving me this box to stand on because I couldn't see over the lectern. Cool. So, hi, I'm Jo. I am a test engineer at Bungie, and I was also one of the founding members of the Bungie Diversity Committee. And in my talk, I'm going to look at our studio and our values and how we live our values through our game development. So, let's start by talking about where this all came about for Bungie. So our studio's been around for a little over 25 years, and early on, our culture was very informal. However, we are now a considerably larger company, and we recognize the need to foster diversity intentionally, proactively, and I think most importantly, with structure. And so in late 2016, our leadership recognized that our organizational growth required us to basically evaluate and write down and codify our company values. So just a little bit about values. Values aren't meant to be a kind of checklist you just go through and you're like, yeah, achievement unlocked, yay. Like, it's a thing that you live. And our values are intended to remind us of how we work and how we treat each other. So these are things that you embody. So what I have here is our first draft, and this was shown to the company, and after we did that, we realized something was missing. So we didn't have anything that captured our commitment to diversity and inclusion. And like, sure, there's a sense in which you can kind of imply it from the other values, but we also felt like it was important enough to stand on its own, so we went back and we redrafted a 7th value. And this is what it looks like. And you can also see all of these values on our website, so don't feel like you need to read them all. It was important in the elements of this value here, like the wording and the imagery really needed to reflect the value itself. So it shows a broad range of people from our studio and our community, and the reason that we wanted to do this is because just talking about values without the action behind it was just really meaningless. And we wanted to have this genuinely represent who we were. I will also say at Bungie, we encourage employees to self-organize and engage with diversity issues. So we have the studio LGBTQIA club, we have Bungie ladies, we have Bungie people of color, for example. So with leadership supporting more diverse practices and employees driving these kind of grassroots organizations, it was just this really perfect opportunity to focus on diversity. And that's basically what we did. So we focused on diversity. We formed literally focus groups that talked about diversity under 3 sub-pillars of the studio, our game community, and the industry as a whole. And so we had over 120 people in the studio participate in these discussions. And so what I'm going to do for the rest of the talk is kind of just cover a couple of things that we've done under those 3 pillars. And I just want to point out this is not an exhaustive list or anything by any means. It's things that we're all learning and things that we're planning to do. So yeah. So here's our first pillar, which is our studio. And here are a couple of things that we've done. So we formed the Bungie Diversity Committee with 10 members, and we have clearly defined roles and goals. And this sets a clear expectation for our involvement with the studio because we are a volunteer committee. We operate as an advisory and an advocacy group for the studio, so people can bring questions to us and consult us, and we facilitate discussions internally to make sure that diversity is a topic that is at the forefront of people's minds, and that people can openly ask questions and that they have a space to do that. We also work with leadership in improving things like transparency and communication and helping to empower leaders and managers in becoming better allies through providing training and studio resources. And I know like Elaine and Leah have already talked about this a little, but we also work with recruiting and HR, and we do a lot of the things that they've mentioned, so I won't talk a lot about that. But we are also moving to look at blind, like we're helping recruiting with like blind reviews of applications, for example. So we have made progress there. Okay, so our second pillar is that of the community. And the opening line from our diversity value is, we want everyone to feel their identity is welcome in our studio and in the worlds we create. And this is kind of really the centerpiece of the community pillar. And so I know I've talked a lot about pillars and there's pillars everywhere, but this is where it gets weird because there are 2 sub-pillars. So it's like you have diversity and then you've got your 3 types of diversity pillars, and now there's like pillars all the way down with these 2 sub-pillars. So the 2 sub-pillars, people at our studio have a place in our community. And people in our community have a place in our games. So on the first side of that sub-pillar, last year we had a presence at several events that we felt embodied our values. So this picture is actually one of us doing a Let's Play at GeekOCon, which is it's a convention that happens every year in Seattle, and it celebrates women and girls that work in STEM and games and comics, and yeah. So we had just like shipped D2 at this point, so we were just kind of showing a group of girls what our game was like. And this is really important because these are events that we staff with Bungie employees, and it gives people a chance to see people who look like them and have them think, I could do that, like I can be a game dev, like that's cool. And yeah, on the other side of the pillar here, we have our community. And our community team makes a really strong effort to highlight and celebrate a cross-section of our members. So we feature a lot of diverse streamers and artists and cosplayers, and the face of our community is diverse, and we want to send that message to everyone. So I know I main a Titan, so I have my Titan shirt on right now, but even if you main a Warlock like this person, you still have a space in our community. Okay, cool. Finally, our last pillar is that of the industry as a whole. So as we move towards an increasingly global studio, we really want to make games that embody our values. And so we try to do this through a game you might know of called Destiny. The characters in our universe are representatives of humanity, and they cover different axes of representation. So we have race and gender and ability and the LGBT spectrum, for example. And we want these to reflect that the world is diverse and that our player base is diverse, but it's not just that. We want to celebrate and normalize these facts because that's just how it is. Outside of our game, it's also important for us and our values to support our employees and people in our industry. So for example, one thing we did last year was we joined with other companies in entertainment and tech in submitting an amicus brief. And basically the point of this, the idea is just to acknowledge each other and to show that we have each other's backs. And this is really important for people who are from underrepresented groups. So it's really simple and effective. It's just a way that you can say, I see you and I support you. And for someone that doesn't hear that a lot, that really goes a long way. And finally, we also want to continue driving these discussions with our colleagues and peers, so all of you. So we're all learning together and we're all gonna be working towards a common goal. So I really encourage all of you to continue these conversations and share information and share ideas about this and just keep those dialogues going, because no one is perfect, but we can all get closer to being better together. And that's all. Thanks.
All right, thanks so much to our panelists. So we're going to go into a little bit of moderated questions. And to kick it off, one thing we wanted to talk about was a little bit on microaggressions. So often the pain of being a minority is often felt by a lot of little things adding up over time, kind of the death by 1,000 cuts. And Joe, did you want to give some extra context if anybody's not super familiar with
Yeah, I just, without giving specific examples of microaggressions, I guess one way to understand it is, suppose you're in a small studio and there's only you're one of 10 people and you're the only member of an underrepresented group at your studio. And let's say every single day someone, each one of your colleagues comes up to you and makes a passing microaggressive comment, and you're just okay, I don't know how people react to microaggressions. But what that means is for each of those interactions, the person that's doing that action has experienced one microaggression in that they, directed one at you. But for you, you've received 9 of them. And now multiply that by the number of days that you work there and scale up the studio. And that is what the death by 1,000 cuts is really like. It's you get tired of this stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so one thing that makes sense is that if a lot of negative things can add up to make a big difference, I think it's also possible for a lot of positive things, micro affirmations, if you will, to add up to make a big difference. What are things that you guys have found in your studios the little things that make a big difference?
Okay, so
excited.
Okay, so the first tangible achievement that I did when I got onto the executive team at Wizards of the Coast was I got better feminine hygiene products in the bathrooms. Seriously, I went into the bathroom right after I got promoted and looked and went, wait, who am I going to complain to? Me? Right? So seriously, little things make a difference like that. And then the second one I wanted to mention is, so at the Child's Play auction this past December, one of our speakers that we had, who's very active in the hospital community, she uses a wheelchair, and she let Child's Play know that, and they built her a ramp to come up onto the podium, right? If you were in a wheelchair, you wouldn't be able to get up here where we are right now. And she came up to do her speech, and the first thing she said is she gushed over the fact that she has done speeches tons of times, and this was the first time someone had provided her a ramp, and that made her feel normal, right? And it's just those kinds of things can really make a difference to make people feel like it's normal, right?
Mm-hmm. I also think allyship is a really important point, and I know some of you mentioned that as well, but so there's a study that shows that people are more likely to believe other people that look like them, which I don't know what it's like. But
even on diversity topics?
Yeah, so it's what this means is white men are more likely to believe other white men, even on issues of diversity. So take from that what you will. But what this means is if you have that, it's if you are in that position to be able to speak about something and to support someone that is underrepresented, then do that, because, and it doesn't have to just, and I'm not just saying this to the white men in the audience, but if you're white, or if you're straight, if you're able-bodied, if you're cisgender, take your, use your voice to help everyone else that isn't in that position. And I think that's one of the things that helps, is just acknowledging that there are other people that are not like you that exist, and normalize the fact that they are there and recognize them. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for those 2 claps.
So, in general, what have you guys, like, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced, and what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned along the way?
Yeah. I will say, when I first moved into the games industry, I used to actually make cartoons for Disney for a living, and that's what I wound up doing, and then transitioned through my work there into working at Xbox, actually, in gaming. And when I first came there, honestly, I got a lot of comments about the fact that I wasn't a big Halo player, and the fact that maybe I wasn't a real gamer in a lot of ways, even though I will tell you, like, I play all sorts of games. I play a lot of D&D. I play a lot of and I play a lot of mobile games, and I play a lot of actually video games. But just because I wasn't mainly a first-person shooter player, somehow I was sort of like, my cred wasn't that great. And I would say that when I started to be then brought into sort of leadership teams and got promoted, and I will say in 3 times in my career, I've been the first woman to come into, say, a senior leadership team or running a group of things. I definitely, in the first several years of my career in the games industry, I wanted to fit in. And I think I was then trying to, because a lot of that was, kind of hitting at me in sort of microaggression kind of ways, that sense of like, oh, maybe they don't think I belong here and all that stuff, to a point where I started to believe it. And then after a while, I was like, no, you know what, I got this. But once you realize that too, what it also made me realize is that it is actually my job to speak up. It is my job to be like, I think that we're thinking about this from a very narrow point of view. And so over time, that's really the thing that I learned. It was a challenge that then became something that I know that, and each one of you can do that, sort of in the idea of like the ally, but it is literally my job, and while it shouldn't be necessarily put on me as the only woman in some of those rooms, you know what? If it's not me, who else is going to do it? And sometimes it's a lot of pressure, but I take that on, and in a way that's the way that I've started to see change. And you actually get a lot of people acknowledging it and giving you more respect. So.
I think one thing that I've kind of realized and try to say to a lot of people on my team is kind of this concept of really, really well-intentioned people and how outdated the kind of well-intentioned colorblindness kind of concept is. Outdated feels like the right word. Like, it's just not where we are anymore, and it's not valuable. And so the kind of well-intentioned comments that I mean are like, I love I treat everybody the same. I treat everybody equally. I don't even just think about who they are. I just like, I just think they're all awesome, and stuff like that. And we can't afford that, because then you're managing everyone as the same person, or then you're interacting with everybody as the same person. That's actually not appropriate. We need to recognize where people are coming from. We need to recognize who they are, see them for who they are, not be colorblind, not be like, oh, we have love in our hearts and we see everyone the same. That's a I see that so much with people who are just really want to do the right thing and then have no idea that that's the wrong thing. And so I think that's something that we try to bring awareness to, but that's something that I think that is something that there's just not room anymore.
Yeah. I think as an industry also, we are very competitive, and we're also conditioned to avoid failure. But this is the thing about being an ally. You will fail at some point, but it's okay. It's like, you will make mistakes, like in the examples Mary and Leah were talking about. Like, you won't get everything perfect all the time, because if you did, we wouldn't need to be here. Yeah, like, you'll get called out by people you've inadvertently hurt, but use this. I think what the important point from this is take that as a moment to learn from that, and just acknowledge that you've done something that's not awesome, apologize, take it as a teaching moment, and move on. And that's and I feel like part of allyship is to do that, and not, to continue supporting the people that you've hurt, instead of just doubling down on it, which I don't believe any of you would do, but yeah, but what we need to do is assume good intent on both sides. So just make sure that you know, if you are hurt, someone, you know, let someone know that you've hurt them, but then also don't assume that they did that because they were, you know, being an ass necessarily. Like, maybe they just need to know, so.
I actually wanted to riff a little bit on the colorblindness kind of comment. So it's important to treat people as individuals, but then it's also important to kind of pull back and look at the macro trends that you see, because sometimes when you just focus on individuals, you miss the larger trends that are happening. So a really good example for this is in the past, when we've decided to send people to GDC here as training opportunities, it's been a conversation between an employee and their manager, right? And they kind of decide, hey, is this the right place for you to go? Is this the right opportunity? This year, for the first time, the executive team looked at the list of the couple dozen people that were on the list to attend GDC. And I noticed that there were 2 women out of the couple dozen of people on the list, myself and 1 person from my team. And I said to all the other dudes, hey, there's only 2 women and it's me and someone on my team, what's up with that? And we identified a thing that we just didn't realize that was there, right? And because of that, now there are a bunch more people who are here. At least 1 is sitting in this room right now. Yay, Marissa! Oh, and Allison's over there too. Yay!
Awesome. So switching gears a little bit, while many of us are working on increasing diversity within our studios, sometimes we can have members of our own communities who are less than enthused about the topic of diversity, to put it generously. How have you guys kind of tackled that issue?
Wait, you mean people in our community might not
Might not be like 100% gung-ho.
So I kind of feel like right now I should just pull out my phone and look at the most recent notification I have from Twitter right now, because that would be fun. So the thing about magic, I'll talk about magic specifically for a minute. The thing about magic is that our community is interesting in the way that it's a face-to-face based community, right? Which is a little bit different than the communities that most of you guys manage. Because of that, there's a lot of really good positive stuff that goes on in that community. I love my community so much. They are the best, really the best people in the world. But there's also people there who decide that for them it's more fun to annoy those people, right? And the issue is that I can't just like block their account. I can't just, you know, keep them out of the game, right? Because the community for Magic is beyond like kind of a platform like that, right? Like the community for Magic is the world, right? So I can't ban people from the world, right? And
If only.
at least not in an ethical or legal way. And I can't make them stop being mean, right? Like I can't do that either. So the question is kind of, well, what do you do there, right? How can you try to make sure that your community, the wonderful goodness of the community that's out there knows that you as a company have their back, especially recognizing the limitations that you have as a company, right? Like it's a really kind of hard thing to balance. I wish I could say I had it all figured out. Unfortunately, I don't. I like to think that we make decisions that move us in the right direction. And I'll say that we've gone through some really tough times lately with some things that have been going on with people, even pulling in people from outside of our community coming in and attacking our community members just to be mean and rile people up. It's nice because sometimes I get things like, I actually came to work one day when we were having this tough time, and there was a handwritten letter that someone from our community had sent me. Just hey, I just wanted to say, I appreciate what you do. And I keep that pinned up over my desk.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I guess like, you know, like Destiny is an online game, so our community is slightly different, but we also build mechanisms into the game to minimize toxicity and encourage fair play. So when you play, if you're running around in the world, you don't automatically start voice chatting with people. We don't have open voice chat. We have guided games, which allows people to find other people they enjoy the place, if they enjoy the same play style, and over time that helps them make friends. And I think one of the things about our community is also making sure that we elevate the positive voices there as well, and amplify those ones, because those are the ones that we want. We value them, and And we also have, and so like, just to get back to Elaine's point, there are things that are going to happen, and and so one of the things we want to do is just make sure that we can mitigate for those situations. So, for example, we have a player support team, we have a security team, and we will investigate these sorts of things. Like, if people are being toxic members of the community, we will investigate and we will ban them, because if you want to have a place where people feel safe and welcome, sometimes you have to do that.
Yeah, it's letting your players know that you have their backs.
Yeah, it's going back to that backs thing.
Yeah. So some quick closing thoughts. So if someone in the audience right now, if they want to start something at their studio, at their company, around diversity to help increase inclusion, what are some immediate next steps that you think that they can take?
I will talk about another story from ArenaNet. When I showed up, there was a Women in Games chapter, but I will say you could do this with any kind of diversity in games group. There was a small group of about 5 women who would get together for lunch every once in a while, but they even came to me as the first member of the senior staff that was a woman, and we're like, we'd love to make this bigger and not just us having lunch and talking about some things. And what we wound up doing was just putting out an open invitation. We did it around the beginning of the year, but you know what? Any day's a good day to start something, and said, let's have a brunch. Let's start off with a breakfast meeting, and it's the games industry, so it was like 10 a.m. We brought people in, we served mimosas, and we had pastries, and it was an hour and a half of us whiteboarding about what are some of the things that we would love to do as a group that was a concrete thing we would produce, like an event or items or a giveaway or a video we could share with the community. There were all sorts of things that we put up there, and then asked everyone that was on, that showed up, who, by the way, out of a company of about 300 people, 75 showed up, and it certainly wasn't all women. It was a really lovely group of folk who not only showed up to that first one, but stuck through it the whole time. And as we had these ideas, then we just asked everybody to vote with their initials, go up and say, okay, what are the 1 or 2 that you would put your time behind, that you would actually be excited about, which allowed us to winnow it down to maybe 3 ideas that then teams went away, and then we picked one the next month that we did the same thing with mimosas and more pastries. And said, okay, we are going to make an event. And what we wound up doing, and actually some of these ladies also came to it because ArenaNet's also in the Seattle area, and we did a regional event that was it was sponsored by our chapter of Women in Gaming, but it was about producing your own career. And we brought people in from all sorts of different disciplines to talk about their experiences. It was open, it was very candid. We were, but it was also with the idea of, hey, you know what, there are things that sometimes you don't always think about if you're a person who feels maybe like you can't ask for a raise, you can't ask for a promotion, you can't do those things. And we just came together and said, this is a problem we see, but it's also an event that we produced together that really galvanized our studio around, hey, this is a cause we believe in, this is something that's important to us. And it also was honestly great recruiting message to put out there to be like, yeah, we value this. We're given, we're spending money and giving people's time to do it. So I would really encourage you, regardless of how small it is, or do you work in a shared workspace, or are you doing some other things, like get people around the idea of how can we not just work with ourselves, but share outward, and that'll help. That's the act, make kind of thing. By doing that, you're going to make a better culture internally because you're putting it out there for people.
Yeah, I would also say that just as far as a next step, just something you can do, take stock. Like even in being part of this panel, I'm going to go do more things. I'm going to steal. The next thing you should do is go whack your neighbor.
Not literally.
The next thing you should do is go and take stock and ask yourself, if as companies and as individuals, if you're doing everything we mentioned, which should be a minimum bar at this point in our industry. And then we have so much further to go. So then what am I doing all those things? And even if you're not in a place that you're necessarily in charge of certain things, go talk to the person who is. So what can you do? There's something probably you can do that you aren't doing. I know we aren't doing even the things that were brought up here. And so that's a next step that you can go back and do, and just whatever that one piece is that you can go take action, and then we're a little bit further.
Anything else?
Sorry, I almost hit you.
All right. Well, and with 1 minute to go, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Some quick housekeeping reminders. Don't forget to fill out your surveys. And also, we're the last panel in here for the day, so we'll be up here at the front if you guys want to come and talk to us and ask questions. So thank you all for attending.